communicating all those ideas to people. On the other side, you have classical politicians who are not very well in expressing their opinions, because sometimes they have no opinions at all. They just want power, like Mrs. Clinton or Romano Prodi, for instance, the totally colorless person, and so on. So I have recently watched a very interesting interview made by one of our colleagues, Kaja Brix, with the president of the European Humanist Federation, Mr. Giulio Ercolesi from Italy. And he was very inconsistent in his vision of what happened in Italy before the 1990s and after 1990s, when he also said about this switch between the classical politicians and the populist politicians, the TV politicians in type of Berlusconi, and he stated that Trump is some version of what Berlusconi has introduced to the politics earlier, and I agree that he is some versions, but for me it's a positive change for him. For Mr. Ercolesi it was a negative thing. So he basically stated in his interview, when answering Kaja's questions, he was saying that before 1990s the situation in Italy was such that basically the Christian Democrats were ruling Italy all the time, because the other part, the only alternative were the communists, and you can always fear what the communists would do. And he justly observed that this fear was not unreal, and this fear was to some extent justified. So the Christian Democrats were just doing what they want and making and swimming in corruption and so on, because they can always put some fear in Italians' hearts that the communists would be worse. And then Mr. Berlusconi came, and so it was like a little bit like a comedy of fears, fear mongering, and so on, and corruption. And after that, the Mr. Berlusconi came. He was making, of course, sometimes contradictory promises. He was populistic in the sense that he was very good with the media, and he also possessed some, and he has some media companies, and of course in Mr. Ercolesi's opinion, he made the Italian politics go bad, and it's very funny that he perceives it like that, because before a while he was complaining about the comedy of Christian Democrats and the communist fear in the previous decades and the corruption. So when was exactly the time when the Italian politics were better, and what exactly was spoiled by Mr. Berlusconi? We don't know. I think that Mr. Ercolesi is just a politician from older generation, and he's a little bit confused with all these matters of social media impact on politics, of internet impact on politics, and so on. And this is the only thing that would explain that he is not seeing the contradiction in his presenting the state of affairs in Italy and Italian political life. For instance, the very puzzling thing is also, but I dedicated an entire separate video clip to that matter, is that he perceives everything what Berlusconi does as negative, whereas you can find alongside bad things from a liberal standpoint, and Mr. Ercolesi, he perceives himself as a liberal, so it would be justified that he would perceive it from a liberal standpoint, but he's not really. He is observing everything what Berlusconi does and what Trump is doing in a negative way, although you can find many liberal elements in what they both were doing or are doing, in case of Trump is doing. So you can, for instance, the professionalization of Italian army, so making it really a private make it into really a professional matter without draft and so on. So making it more like American Army or British Army, without many recruits who don't know nothing at the beginning and had to be trained and so on, so it's not